the question that was hard for me to answer was, do you have a PhD? And I was 2 weeks out. And I was like, if I click no, then they'll ignore my application. If I click yes, it's technically a lie, but I should have it in 2 weeks.
Right, you should.
And I clicked yes. I was like, I'll just ask for forgiveness later.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Next Step Podcast. I'm Jeff Kozlowski, a senior marketing strategist here at the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry, supporting our graduate education and postdoc affairs. So excited to have Savannah Moritzky join us today. She's a 2022 graduate of our Translational Biomedical Science PhD program. She now works for a startup company in Seattle, Washington called HDT Bio. We talk a little bit about how she discovered Rochester, what her job application process was like, applying for a job all the way across the country, not having any real connections or network out there. She talks all about what that was like, and of course, what life is like at a startup company. Welcome, Savannah. Thanks for joining us. How is your visit? Is this the first time since defending your thesis and moving that you've been back?
No, I came back for graduation. It's a little weird with PhDs because you defend and you don't always graduate right after.
Right.
So I defended in February, came back in May. Also, my partner's sister lives in Canandaigua, so we've come back to visit a few times for different holidays. He also went to college in Rochester, so we came back for a wedding.
So good for you for coming back for commencement. I know some people like forego that whole thing, but I know you work so hard. It's like I want to.
Yeah, I considered it, but I bought my cap and gown before I moved, and then it was a lot of work to come back. I was like, but I already bought my cap and gown, so I have to come back.
What am I going to do with this thing otherwise?
Yeah, exactly. So I did end up coming back, but it was a little bit weird because I ended up defending before a lot of my friends. So graduation, most of my friends actually graduated the following commencement. Mm-hmm. So when I was at graduation, there was only like a few people left who I really knew. Okay. And then the next graduation, I saw photos and I was like, just Photoshop me in right there. Because these are all my friends, but it was a different graduation. A little odd. Yeah. But it's good to be back, but I don't know anybody anymore. All my friends are gone.
And it's only been 2 years.
I know.
Everybody's gone.
Yeah, most of my friends, there's a few of my friends still doing postdocs here, but most of them have moved on and are doing other things. So we'll get some drinks tonight, but it's like kind of dwindling the people I still know in Rochester.
Yeah.
Good memories here.
Thank you for spending some time with us. You're now in Seattle, and we'll talk more about your job in a minute, but what was it, kind of moving cross country, Rochester to Seattle? What was that move like, and what's it been like adjusting to life out there on the West Coast? It
was a little different, I think, than most people's cross-country move. My partner got an offer in Seattle, and it was during COVID, 2022, so kind of a weird time of COVID, or it was 2021 actually. Mm-hmm. And they said, we're opening the offices in the fall, you have to move. And so they paid for all of the move, but it was 6 months before I defended. So for 6 months, I lived dorm style, I call it, with like a couch, a bed, and a Jenny Light poster on the wall was like all my decorations I had. I felt like I was living in a frat house. Yeah. But they did pay for it, and so a lot of that stuff was taken care of. And then I flew home for a few weeks and then flew to Seattle. And then I had a job within a month. So a little bit of time to adjust, but not a whole lot. Mm-hmm. And then adjusting to Seattle, it's the largest city I've ever lived in. And compared to people who are from Chicago or LA or New York, Seattle's so small. It felt so big to me.
Compared to here, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. And compared to where I grew up, which I guess you could say I've lived a few different places, but Moncks Corner, South Carolina, I think the population's like 6,000. So Rochester felt huge to me. I was like, there's so many people here. And then I moved to Seattle, and I'm like, oh, Rochester's small. And I'm sure if I moved to New York City, I would think the same thing.
Yes.
So that was an adjustment for sure. And it just felt like so many places to go. Is how do I have time to eat all of the food I want to eat?
Oh, gosh, I'm sure. I've only been to Seattle once, and I just remember how cool like that public market area is. I did all the
the touristy stuff.
touristy
I love the
things.
public market.
So cool. Do you watch them throw the fish and stuff?
I don't watch them throw the fish. We did buy fish one time, and they threw it to us when
Did
we
you
first
catch
moved.
it?
Yeah,
Okay.
which was really fun. We did not expect to have to catch the fish, and they were just like, "Whoa!" And then I don't remember if I caught it or if my boyfriend caught it, but it was interesting. Yeah, we do like the public market. I know it's considered a tourist attraction, but I mean, we go when people come to visit, of course, but then some other times we'll be like, oh, let's just go down there. And they're developing the area a lot.
Okay.
You can actually go down from Pike Place down to the pier now. They just opened it up, so it's super nice.
I remember, I still have it. I don't know if this person's still there. So like at the public market, it's like a market with a bunch of vendors, right? And there was one person there selling miniature flowers. Like I don't know if that person is still there, but we still have it on our our kitchen window. It's like the flower pot is this big. There's a rose in it. Like, but they're all like flower, what do you call them? Bouquets or like just flower decor.
Dried?
About this big. Huh?
Are
Yeah,
they
yeah.
dried?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if they were ever real.
Oh.
But it's just, there's.
I think I saw those when I was there last weekend.
Cool.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of really cool. The flowers there are so beautiful.
Yeah.
I just bought some pears there because I bought them the time before, and then I was like, hey, can I get some of these pears?
Well, what was I? Oh, we were just before we started too. Just real quickly before we move on to your career and why we're actually here. No snow out there. I didn't realize. I know it's kind of similar in the way that there's a lot of gray and whatnot. Not that Rochester summers. You don't have to worry. There's not a lot of gray, but winter and early spring, it's like we start to get a little gray here. But snow is just not. People are just not used to. You say your office was like dead when there was a dusting of snow on the ground.
It dusted. It was the smallest amount of snow, and I showed up like, where is everybody? It snowed. I was like, did it? Like coming from Rochester where it snows 10 inches overnight and they're clearing the roads. They just don't have the infrastructure for it.
Yeah.
It's really hilly and people aren't used to it. Outside of like the city itself, it does snow a little bit more, but like within the city, it only dusts usually. It's pretty rare to get snow, and it does shut the whole city down, which was a big transition from coming from here. But my snow boots are retired. My big long coat rarely gets to see the light of day now.
Yeah. Not
Things I was wearing every
thing.
day. Yeah. My snow boots got really good use, and I was like, should I sell them? I was like, what if it snows? Yeah.
You never know. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your current role. You're at a company called HDT Bio, is that right? And is your title? I was checking LinkedIn. Scientist? Is that
Scientist one.
Scientist one at HDT
Yep.
Bio. What exactly does that mean? And what does HDT Bio do?
It's funny because when people ask like, what is your role? I say scientist, and it doesn't mean much to most people. I think it's the common nomenclature, but like most people outside of the field, they're like, that means nothing. So what scientists typically do is scientist roles do have PhDs at our company and are in charge of designing experiments, analyzing data, running experiments, managing research associates typically, also writing papers and writing grants and kind of like managing those. I haven't written a grant, but it's something that I could do. My role in particular, I'm called a clinical immunologist. So I work on our phase 1 clinical trial that we had for COVID. And I've done everything from process blood and organize samples to running the samples, doing experiments, analyzing that data, presenting that data. When I started, we only had 25 people. I think now we're closer to 50. So there wasn't anyone. I did have help processing the blood, but there was no one whose like job it was to do that, and it needed to be done. So I did it, got things organized. And I think when I started, we only had 3 or 4 people enrolled in the trial, and so it was like really had just started, and things were, getting started. And organization-wise, I was like, well, we need to think about how we're going to run these samples and how we're going to be able to find them once we run, because at the time we only had one box of samples versus once we were at the end, we had 40. So I was like, we need to solve these problems now while it's early. And our company, we have a nanoparticle called Lion, and we have a rep-RNA, so it's a self-replicating RNA, and they're paired together. And the interesting thing is that our nanoparticle, instead of having the RNA on the inside, like other LNPs, we have the RNA on the outside. And so you can mix and match this Lion with other rep-RNAs for different infectious diseases. So potentially you could be in a clinic and you could have one patient come in who needs a vaccine for flu, and you could take that rep-RNA, pair it with Lion, and then later another person would come in wanting a vaccine for COVID, and you could pair it. And so that kind of gives us this mix and match, and it allows our nanoparticle to be stockpiled. And so there's a lot of possibilities for it in the future. We're only right now in phase 1 trials, but hoping to move forward. Our phase 1 trial for the COVID vaccine is complete, and we're starting phase 1 clinical trials for 2 other infectious diseases. The next one will be CCHF, which is Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. And I'll be working on that. I'm looking forward to that. It'll be a lot different than working on a COVID vaccine for sure.
Okay. So HDT Bio, you mentioned, when you first started was 25 people. So it was a young company. And has grown in the couple years you've been there. I think you mentioned now you're probably right around 50.
Yeah.
What has it been like sort of being, one of the first employees at a startup and, watching it or being there while they kind of experience growth and figuring out what's needed to continue to be successful? Like, what's it been like being in that kind of environment?
It's kind of funny because with startups a lot, I think with Amazon, it started in a garage.
Yeah.
And although we didn't start in a garage, I did share an office that used to be a closet. It was a converted closet with 2 other people.
Oh.
No windows. A little, like, now that I look back, I'm like, that was kind of weird. But for me, coming from academia, it's just like, this is normal.
Yeah.
And like our lab space was much smaller. We shared it with like 2 other small companies. And then about a year ago, we moved into a brand new building where we have our own office that we don't share, our own like brand new lab facilities. And so that's been like really cool to see that growth. And I think when you are at a company that's so small and everybody personally, you do feel a lot of personal responsibility and a lot of pride in your company. I remember when we announced that we were getting company pens, and we were so excited. Like these small things, like we got our jackets and we were like, oh my gosh, we got jackets. And now, and we got an espresso machine. That was so exciting.
That is exciting.
Those types of things that you like, and you just know everybody really well, and it's really cool. But I mean, as my talk before, I talked about wearing a lot of different hats. And so when you don't have things like a lab manager, or you don't have someone that does hiring, you don't have HR, then you kind of have to take on those responsibilities. And so when we used to hire, you would have to go through all of the resumes yourself. You would have to do all of the phone screens, all of the calls, everything. And now we have someone whose responsibility is to do those things. And so you have to kind of let go of those responsibilities, which is hard for some people because like I've been doing it and you have to let go, but you always have other things you could be doing that you're actually qualified to do.
Yeah. Does it give you kind of an appreciation for,
yeah, absolutely,
some of the roles that
I was so happy when we did get HR and we did get a lab manager, because it took stuff off my plate and I could focus on other things like ordering supplies or fixing equipment. You would kind of have to do on the fly, and I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to contact reps to get this centrifuge fixed. You got to figure it out. But that's really helped me, I think, build my resume and have to learn a lot of like these other random skills that maybe in a larger company you'd be more siloed and wouldn't have to.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that. And, I was putting together, updating my resume, and I was like, oh, I hadn't updated my resume since I started. And I was like, I have so many new things that I know how to do now that I didn't really appreciate. And in the lab too, I started working on a different project, and I had a lot less expertise technically and had to learn from scratch. I feel like I'm a new employee because I'm having to learn everything that I haven't learned before. And I think that's like really helped me grow like as a scientist.
I bet. And so you've been there 2 years. So still very early on in your career journey. Likely the whole job application process is still fresh in your mind, not being that long ago. Can you talk about what the process was like for you? Because you were applying to jobs from Rochester in Seattle to be with your partner. And so, you know, leading up to this, we were talking, you didn't have a network out there. So it's like networking really wasn't helping you in that sense. So you were kind of doing it the old-fashioned way, right? Of just like throwing applications out there.
Yeah, I was applying to things that sounded interesting and seeing what stuck. And I didn't really have a network. And I was applying before I had defended and kind of just doing it when I had time and not really focusing on it solely and thinking, if I get something before I go, fine. If I don't, then I'll use my network once I get there or build a network once I get there. Because I didn't know anybody. But it did work for me. The easy apply button, you know, clicked that, submitted my resume, answered like 2 questions. The question that was hard for me to answer was, do you have a PhD? And I was 2 weeks out. And I was like, if I click no, then they'll ignore my application. If I click yes, it's technically a lie, but I should have it in 2 weeks.
Right, you should.
And I clicked yes. I was like, I'll just ask for forgiveness later. And so that worked out, and I got an email the next day asking if I wanted to hop on a call to talk about the role. I was like, sure, you know, very anxious, like, oh, I don't know what this is going to entail.
Yeah.
And then I had a job. I was still defending, and so there was, a few gaps, but I had a job within 2 months of defending, which I think it takes some people longer. I think I got lucky, but I also had some of the skills they were looking for to work on the clinical trial lab stuff.
And it's good to know about the LinkedIn easy apply button, because sometimes I see that and I think a million people are going to apply for that job. Like, there's no way they'll see my name, but you clearly made it through.
And I've been on the other side of it when you were recruiting the RA that we have now. And they do sort somewhat based on the skills that you have. And it's like kind of easy to sort through people. But yeah, it is a little bit overwhelming, especially when you see 100+ applicants for this role. You're like,
right. They show you how many people apply.
Yeah, like they'll never find me, but it's always a numbers game, right?
Yeah.
And I was a little persistent with, I followed up with the scientist and said, oh, where are we in the application process? And maybe that helped.
So you did follow up. Was that via LinkedIn or email?
Email.
Okay.
Because I thought that the first interview had gone well, and they had asked me if I wanted to give a talk, and I thought that was a good sign. And I didn't hear anything for a few weeks, so I was kind of like, hi, it's me again. Like, is there any update? And yeah, I was unsure, but I hadn't heard anything back. And so I thought, I just wanted to, I was really interested in the company, and I had a really good first interview. So I thought, like, I'll just send an email and see, if I can get an update.
Cool. And you mentioned sitting in on and conducting interviews now yourself at the company. Now that you do that, we talked earlier this week about feeling like, when you see a job description, there's so many quote unquote requirements or qualifications, and it's easy to look at that and say, oh, I don't have that one, I'm not probably a good fit. But now that you're on sort of the other side of it, is it 100% necessary that an applicant has every single one of the qualifications listed?
No, definitely not. We call that a wish list of the perfect person would have all 20 of these things, but we realize that it's unlikely, and most people have only pieces of that puzzle, and then they can learn the rest on the job. And just having like some of those skills is helpful, and if you have none of them, it's unlikely that you will be get an interview. But if you have a few of them and you have things that are close enough, then you should be able to learn on the job. Especially if you've been in a lab before, we realize that if you don't know a specific technique, you can usually learn it if you have like some lab experience. And so then other soft skills that you have also, will have you stand out in the interview, and they're like, oh, well, they, don't know all of the techniques, but they'll probably learn. And I think too, when you call references, you can always ask how easily they learn new skills and things like that, and how willing and also showing that you're willing to learn new things is really, really important for us. It's just, I don't know how to do it, but I'm willing to learn, and I'm eager to learn.
And so when you first started, you said within a couple months of defending, you had the job. So you went quickly from being a trainee in a PhD program to potentially, an expert at this company. How, what was that like? And, was there imposter syndrome there at all? And then if so, how did you sort of overcome that, or or did you?
I think I have for the most part. It comes back every once in a while.
Sure.
It was a little bit intimidating because working on the clinical trial, I knew it was really important, and so I wanted to do things right. And I think because I wanted to do things right, I was very diligent in doing as much research and reading as I possibly could. Also, I realized that I was given by my company and my manager the benefit of the doubt, that I am the expert. And so I felt that I was trusted, and I went with my instincts, because a lot of the assays I was running, I've done a lot of them before. I mean, doing ELISpot, I thought I was never gonna have to do an ELISpot again, actually. I've done so many of them, and then I came in, they're like, we're doing ELISpot. And I was like, I could do an ELISpot with my eyes closed, easy, same with some of the other assays. And so once I learned to just trust my gut and go with it and use my experiences, the imposter syndrome, I think, went away. But I did, a lot of reading and making sure. And I also consulted with other scientists, asking for advice and things like that. And that was helpful as well.
I feel like it's kind of like rare. We tend to put more pressure on ourselves than anybody else. Like we may go into a situation thinking we're like the young person that doesn't know as much as everybody else, but in reality, like nobody else is thinking that. Everybody's like, we hired this person for a reason.
I came in and I was one of the only people who had worked with a clinical trial, worked with human samples, and done these experiments on human samples. And so when I would ask a question, my manager would say, well, you're the expert. And I was like, I guess I am the expert. And so I just had to learn to trust myself and do what I thought was right.
Yeah. So just a couple more questions here. I want to, though, take it quickly back to like pre-graduate school. Before you found Rochester, you mentioned you're from South Carolina.
Yeah.
How did Rochester get on your radar for a graduate program?
So I'll go back. Yeah, in undergrad, I went in wanting to be an MD, a medical doctor, and then realized that I liked science and not necessarily like the patient care aspect. I just thought science was really cool, and I thought the only thing I could do was be a doctor. And so I joined the Ronald E. McNair Scholars Program at Winthrop University, which is it's a national program. There was an astronaut named Ronald E. McNair who died in the Challenger explosion, and there was a foundation, or I guess a scholarship set up, where the scholarship program for students that are underrepresented, so either students of color or low-income students or first-generation students, are given opportunities to do research with the hope that they will continue on to a PhD program. And so I guess I still am a McNair scholar, and that really gave me the opportunity to do research. And University of Rochester has a McNair Scholars Program, and I think that they had a symposium or something that our director had gone to, and I remember her saying, oh, Rochester, they'll take care of you, or something like that. And so I went on my radar and I looked into it, and I was like, oh, actually, a lot of the coursework looked really interesting to me. I wanted to work on vaccines, and there's a whole vaccine institute. And so it was like, oh, this seems perfect for me. And then the Translational Biomedical Science program as well gave me opportunities to take courses that are outside of just bench science. So I took clinical trial design, which helped me actually. Yeah. I didn't think so at the time, but here I am. And then other courses like biostatistics and policy and things like that I don't know if I would have had the opportunity to take at other schools.
Okay, cool. Before we wrap up, if there is a trainee watching interested in going into maybe the biotech space, getting ready, either, going through graduate school or getting ready to wrap up and hit the job market, any particular advice you like to pass on to those folks?
I guess, like, as I was saying with applications, a lot of times it's like a numbers game. There's some luck involved. But if you can network and reach out to people, even if it's an informational interview or reaching out to someone on LinkedIn. Someone reached out to me on LinkedIn in Seattle who was hoping to go into biotech, and I met with them for coffee. We just chatted about what it's like. And then they're applying for, a job, and, I can at least reach out to the hiring manager and say, I met this person, they're nice, they're interested in our company, even if I haven't directly worked with them. And even if that doesn't get them the job necessarily, it might help a little bit. Just when there are hundreds of applications, just knowing someone's nice and genuine can help, at least like get it to the top of the pile. And a lot of people that I work with in our company have worked with other people in our company from in other places. And so there's kind of that like networking, especially in a smaller biotech hub like Seattle, where they're like, oh, I worked with that person, during when they're interviewing or something. Oh, I worked with them at this company. And so there's kind of that networking that's really helpful in this space. And so, yeah, I think that's important if you can network. But as I moved there fresh, you can also just apply and see what happens, and maybe be a little persistent.
There we go. Well, Savannah, thank you so much. I don't have any more questions. Is there anything you wanted to touch on before we wrap up here? Or
I don't think so.
Did we hit everything?
I think so.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the time.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the latest episode of the Next Step podcast. If you liked what you heard, please share with other members of the University of Rochester community or anyone you think could benefit from these career stories. And we wish you nothing but the best in your own career journey. Until next time.